German soldiers heard the shells arriving so quickly that some of them reached the only explanation that made sense. The British had built an automatic field gun. They had not. What they were hearing was 6 men, one hand-operated breech, and a weapon so ordinary that it was named after the weight of its shell, the 25-pounder. It was not Britain's version of the German 88. The 88 was a spear, fast, precise, and lethal far beyond the range where most targets could answer. The 25-pounder was something else. It was weather, and by 1945, weather had done more of the war's daily work than the spear ever could. The 88 earned its reputation honestly. It began as an anti-aircraft gun, throwing shells high enough and fast enough to reach bombers. Then German crews discovered that the same velocity could punch through tanks at ranges that felt almost unfair. In North Africa, an Allied tank crew might never see the gun that killed them. There would be a flash on a distant ridge, a crack across the desert, and then steel would come through the armor. That is why the 88 became famous. But fame favors the weapon that wins the clean duel. Wars are rarely decided by clean duels. They are decided by the weapon that can be manufactured, transported, supplied, repaired, trained on, and brought into action every single day. That was the 25-pounder's territory. Its story began with a British army that had too many problems and too little money. After the First World War, British field artillery depended heavily on 2 older weapons. The 18-pounder was a flat-shooting field gun. It sent shells fast and straight, useful against visible targets, but less useful when the enemy was behind a ridge. The 4.5-inch howitzer solved the opposite problem. It could throw shells in a high arc over cover, but it was slower, shorter ranged, and required its own ammunition, transport, spare parts, and training. 2 guns meant 2 supply systems, 2 schools, 2 kinds of ammunition, 2 sets of everything that had to cross a beach, survive a desert road, or follow an army through mud. Britain could not afford that kind of duplication, so the designers did not build the most powerful gun they could imagine. They built the one gun the army could afford to have everywhere. The answer was a gun howitzer, one weapon that could fire low and fast like a field gun, or high and curved like a howitzer. Its bore was 87.6 millimeters, 3.45 inches, but the name came from the standard shell, 25 pounds. The first version, the Mark I, appeared in 1935 as a new barrel fitted to the old 18-pounder carriage. It was a bridge between eras. The real form of the weapon arrived as the Mark II on a purpose-built carriage, entering wartime service in 1940 just as Britain needed mass production more than perfection. 1 gun replaced 2. 1 ammunition family replaced 2. 1 training pipeline replaced 2. That may not sound dramatic, but logistics is what drama looks like before the battle starts. The 25-pounder's flexibility came from its ammunition system. Its crew could choose separate propellant charges. Charge 1, Charge 2, or Charge 3, depending on the range and angle required. For the longest shot, there was Charge Super. With a high explosive shell in the supercharge, the gun could reach about 13,400 yards, more than 7.5 miles. Its elevation allowed it to fire low across open ground or arc shells over ridges. Its carriage had only limited traverse, a weakness that mattered when the target moved. But the gun carried a simple answer beneath it, a circular steel firing platform. The crew rolled the wheels onto that platform, lifted the trail, and could swing the entire weapon through 360 degrees. Not with motors, not with hydraulics, with muscle. 2 men could pivot nearly 1 3/4 tons of gun toward a new direction in seconds. That platform did not make the 25-pounder sophisticated. It made it practical, and practical weapons survive contact with real armies. The gun weighed roughly 3,600 pounds on its carriage. A truck or tracked tractor could tow it, and the crew could still manhandle it into the final position. 6 men were standard: the detachment commander, the man at the breech, the layer on the sights, the loader, and 2 ammunition numbers. In an emergency, 4 could keep it working. Then there was the rate of fire. A trained crew could sustain 6 to 8 rounds a minute. In a short emergency burst, the best detachments could reach roughly 17 before heat and exhaustion forced the pace back down. 17 25-pound shells, from 1 gun, in 1 minute. Now multiply that by 8 guns in a battery. At a sustained pace, that is roughly 50 to 64 shells landing every minute from a single battery. In a short burst, the number could climb far higher. The weapon did not need to be the hardest-hitting gun on the battlefield. It needed to keep the sky over one patch of ground full. Its ammunition showed what it was built to do. High explosive was the normal answer. Smoke could blind a position or mark a target. Star shells could illuminate the battlefield. There were even leaflet rounds. And yes, there was solid armor-piercing shot. That last round created the comparison that still distorts the gun's story. because once a field gun can fire directly at a tank, people began asking whether it was a tank killer. In 1942, Britain needed it to be one. North Africa exposed a dangerous gap in British anti-tank defense. The 2-pounder anti-tank gun had been effective against early war armor, but German tanks were getting thicker protection, and the 2-pounder was running out of answers. The replacement 6-pounder existed. It simply was not present in the numbers the front required, so the Army reached for the weapon it did have, the 25-pounder. Crews lowered the barrel, opened the sights, loaded solid shot, and aimed directly at approaching tanks. With armor-piercing ammunition and the supercharge, the gun could defeat roughly 2 3/4 inches of armor at around 400 yards. Against many Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs, at close range and from the right angle, that could be enough. The field gun had become an emergency anti-tank gun. For a while it helped hold the gap, but this is where the honest story becomes more impressive than the heroic one. The 25-pounder was not a good tank duelist. Its muzzle velocity was around 700 feet per second. That was useful for artillery, but far below the velocity of a purpose-built anti-tank weapon like the 88. Its normal traverse was narrow. If a tank crossed the gun's front, the crew might have to drag the entire weapon around on the platform while exposed. And a 25-pounder firing over open sights was not hidden artillery anymore. It was a large target standing in daylight. The crew had to see the tank, which meant the tank could see them. German armor did not need to close very far before machine guns, high-explosive shells, or direct fire could tear the detachment apart. Later, improved capped armor-piercing shot and an extra propellant increment tried to squeeze more velocity from the gun. The added pressure required a muzzle brake to control the recoil, but chemistry could not erase geometry. A Panther's frontal armor was beyond the 25-pounder's reliable reach. A Tiger's was farther beyond it still. Against those vehicles, the gun's best chances came from a flank, very short range, or massed high explosive that disrupted the attack, broke the following infantry, damaged tracks, or forced crews to button up. That was not tank destruction in the clean cinematic sense. It was survival by volume. And across the same desert, the 88 was waiting. The contrast was brutal. The German gun threw its armor-piercing shell at roughly 20,600 feet per second, more than half again the velocity of the British field piece. At ranges where the 25-pounder's solid shot was losing authority, the 88 was still killing. It could defeat around 3.5 to 4 inches of armor at roughly 100 yards, and more at closer range. In a straight exchange across open desert, the result was not mysterious. The 88 saw farther, hit harder, and killed first. Any story claiming the 25-pounder somehow beat the 88 at its own game is not defending the British gun. It is missing the reason the British gun mattered. A spear should win a duel. Weather does not duel. Weather closes the road, fills the valley, hides the horizon, and changes what an entire army can do. That was the 25-pounder's real power. By the end of the war, British factories had produced more than 12,000 of them. Commonwealth production pushed the total to roughly 13,000, with guns built not only in Britain but also in Canada and Australia. The 88 family was produced in even greater raw numbers, roughly 19,000 to 20,000, across anti-aircraft guns, tank armament, and dedicated anti-tank versions. So the simple claim that Britain merely outbuilt Germany is wrong. The difference was concentration. Germany's 88s were divided among several urgent jobs: protecting cities and armies from aircraft, arming heavy tanks, and destroying armor from the ground. The 25-pounders were overwhelmingly doing one thing: field artillery. That meant commanders could plan around them. Ammunition columns could carry one standard family of shells and charges. Training units could teach one drill. Repair depots could stock familiar parts. Infantry brigades could expect supporting batteries to speak the same technical language. The 25-pounder did not become powerful because it was cheap in spite of being good. It became powerful because cheapness, simplicity, mobility, and performance were designed as one system. The British had chosen a compromise. Then they built enough of that compromise to turn it into doctrine. A single gun was useful. A battery was dangerous. A regiment was a machine. And hundreds of guns controlled by maps, telephones, survey teams, forward observers, ammunition columns, and exact firing schedules could transform a battlefield before the infantry moved. That system reached its most famous expression at Alamein. On the night of October 23, 1942, Operation Lightfoot began. Along the front, somewhere between 884 and 1,000 Commonwealth guns of different calibers opened fire. The 25-pounder formed the backbone of the barrage. In some sectors, artillery concentration reached as high as 52 guns per kilometer of front, More than 80 guns packed into a single mile. For around 20 minutes, the night did not contain separate gunshots. It became one continuous mechanical horizon. Gun lines fired to a timed plan. High explosive struck infantry positions. Smoke and dust blinded observation. Communications were cut. Enemy batteries were suppressed. Routes, minefield lanes, command posts, and assembly areas were hammered in sequence. This was not one weapon trying to pierce one target. It was an entire fire control system making a section of the front impossible to use. The individual shell was not extraordinary. The arrival of thousands of ordinary shells at the correct place and time was. That is the mechanism. Not magic, not a secret automatic cannon. Standardization, drill, communications, ammunition, and enough guns to make the plan real. German soldiers later described British artillery fire as if the enemy possessed some hidden automatic field piece. The bursts came too quickly. The pressure continued too long. The sound did not seem compatible with men lifting shells and working a breech by hand, but every impossible rhythm was built from ordinary actions. A loader turning, a breech opening, a cartridge entering, a layer correcting, a commander giving the next order, again. The myth of the automatic gun was not a misunderstanding of technology. It was a measurement of training. That is why the 25-pounder's career continued long after the battlefield that made it famous. The British Army kept it as its primary field gun into the 1960s. It remained in training and ceremonial roles for years afterward. Across the Commonwealth and beyond, it served in Korea, Malaya, Suez, and the wars between India and Pakistan. Some armies kept it for decades. Ireland retained its guns until 2009. A weapon designed during the 1930s as an answer to financial constraints stayed useful across generations because its value had never depended on one spectacular trick. It could move, it could be supplied, it could fire flat or high, it could illuminate, screen, suppress, and destroy. It could be handled by a small crew under bad conditions. And when a commander needed more effect, the answer was not to pray for one perfect gun. It was to bring more 25-pounders onto the same target. So how effective was it really? As an anti-tank gun, it was a brave emergency measure. It could kill some medium tanks at close range. It could help break an armored attack when many guns fired together. But it was exposed, slow to track, limited in penetration, and outclassed by the 88 in every clean measure of anti-armor performance. The moment the 6-pounder became widely available, the 25-pounder could return to the role it had been designed to perform. And in that role, it was one of the most effective weapons of the war. Not because it outranged every rival, not because it fired the largest shell, not because it won the duel people like to imagine. It was effective because one gun replaced two, because one ammunition system crossed the sea instead of two, because crews could fire quickly, move quickly, and learn the same drill across an army, because factories could build it by the thousand, because batteries could appear behind almost every formation that needed them, because when the order came, hundreds of ordinary guns could speak as one. The 88 was the deadlier weapon. The 25-pounder was the weather.